Hello and welcome to Ravlic at Large. My name's Tom Ravlic. Thank you for joining me for this particular episode of the program. One of the most significant issues society faces today is the discord that comes from the arguments and the manner in which we talk about what is going on in Israel, Gaza, and in other circumstances across the world where there is conflict. In particular, what people have observed since October 7, 2023, is an increase in protests, but also an increase in the visibility of um, what you can only call very viral, virulent, egregious hatred. Some of that has been, a lot of that has been an expression of what people would call anti-Semitism, but there's also been expressions of hatred towards other groups as a result of what has gone on in the Middle East. Joining me today is somebody who is uniquely placed to talk about how we turn the temperature down in the area of expressing hatred towards others. Jeff Schoep has been the founder of an organisation called Beyond Barriers. He's also involved with the Simon Wiesenthal Centre as a speaker and a consultant. What some of you may not know is for a bulk of his life, he was involved in the National Socialist movement. So he's gone 180 degrees. Jeff and I are going to touch on that. We're going to look at some of the issues that exist in the US and in Australia in relation to extremism, radicalisation, and how we effectively turn down the temperature. That is, get the bucket of ice, tip it over ourselves, and cool it when it comes to the expression of antipathy towards others that we may dislike for whatever reason. Let me bring Jeff in now. He's in Detroit, Michigan. Jeff, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom. It's an honor to be here.
And now, if we can touch on your personal history first, you now do a lot of work with the Simon Wiesenthal Centre. How did that come about?
Well, my background was for 27 years, I was involved in an organization called the National Socialist Movement. It's basically America's Nazi Party. For 25 of those years, I was the national director of that organization. In early 2019, I walked away from racism and hate and started speaking out against racism, hatred, anti-Semitism, and that's when I made that announcement that I was planning to speak out against it and work in peace building. That Simon Wiesenthal Center reached out within just a couple of days of my website going up, and reached out, and we've had an incredible relationship since then. They're engaged in educational programs across the country, across the globe, fighting anti-Semitism, racism, human rights and civil rights issues. Wonderful organization doing incredible work.
How challenging were some of those early conversations with the Simon Wiesenthal Centre, given where you'd spent basically a quarter of a century?
It was interesting. I mean, it was when they first reached out to me, when I was going to meet with them, because they were on Rick Eaton, their director of research. He had reached out, and he had been working with them for 35 plus years, I think 38 years or something now, or longer maybe. And he had reached out, and I remember saying to my girl before I left for the meeting, I said, if I don't come home tonight, I said, I'm going to meet with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and if I don't come home, it means I'm on an involuntary extradition to Israel. That's that was I laugh about it now, but at the time it was, it was in the back of my head, like, well, what if, I mean, they were also known for tracking down war criminals after World War II and things like that. And so I was well aware of the organization. And that's really all I knew about it. I didn't know that they were engaged in, all this other educational work and things like that. But I went and met with them, and I did not get extradited. So it was pretty wonderful. It's a great organization doing incredible work for humanity, and it's truly an honor for me to work with them and do my part.
What do you do with them?
So, well, I'm a consultant, public speaker, and educator. So a lot of times I will go. They have a program called Combat Hate that goes into schools across the country. So I've spoken. I don't even know how many schools, countless numbers in like New York City. I've spoken in Chicago, across the state of Illinois, out in California, and other places around the country, and do a lot of community events. So last week we did one with Senator Laura Fine in Illinois, and this coming week, actually, no, the day after tomorrow, I'm doing another thing with the county commissioner out there, and other public events, to tackle anti-Semitism, to tackle racism, and share my background and story, and basically how you can affect change, how you can speak to people. I talk about a concept or a program we call relational dialogue, which is basically the based on the methods that were used to reach me and help me see the light, basically, and change my worldview.
What you mentioned a string of states. There's a few more states than the ones you've mentioned in the United States, right? Is there a reason for those particular locations being, well, the ones you go to? Are they areas that are prone to a lot of hatred, a lot of racism, a lot of bigotry in the communities?
Really, I'm willing to go anywhere and everywhere I can, to try to make a difference. A lot of the places that I've been, the Simon Wiesenthal Center has chapters in those areas, so they have relationships with the schools and with the county and state governments and things of that nature. So, in particular, like the states I've been to the most are areas that we have those connections in. But it's not limited to that. I've done work with the U.S. government, with the Office of Juvenile Justice, which OJJDP. It's a wing of the Justice Department. I've done some projects with them to counter youth hate crimes and bullying. They released a curriculum. It came out this fall. I was one of the people that helped pilot that. I didn't write it, but I was one of the educators that helped pilot the program. So we do a lot of different things. I'm engaged in a lot of different things, but wherever I can make a difference and reach people.
Now, one of the challenges in dealing with managing or minimizing the growth of ideas that we would all agree are not conducive to social cohesion, right? Is to get people to understand things better. I mean, one way of doing so, obviously, is conversation. Daryl Davis is an important person in your life. Tell me about the first encounter you had with someone who's a talented musician, but also somebody you might have had some difficulties with in having a conversation at a point in time.
Yes, when I was still involved in the National Socialist Movement, I had agreed to show up for this interview for a film. It's called Accidental Courtesy. I didn't know I was meeting Daryl Davis, and for those that don't know who Daryl is, Daryl's an African American musician. He played with Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, lots of famous musicians, and he's a famous musician on his own. Incredible piano player and singer and guitar player. He does it all. But I went down for this interview, and I didn't realize that I was going to be meeting Daryl Davis. And of course, in the movement, we knew who Daryl was because besides being a musician, What he's known for was getting people out of the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazi organizations. So when I first met, when I was waiting outside of this diner where we were filming, and this big black man walks over and he says, "Hi, I'm Daryl Davis. You must be Jeff." And I said, "Hi, it's nice to meet you." I'm thinking, "Gosh, I know this guy's face from somewhere, and I know that name, but I couldn't quite place it right at that moment." And by the time we sat down for the interview, it clicked. After we were sitting there, I was like, "This is the guy that gets people out of these type of organizations." So I kind of escalate the conversation, and I'm trying to, I'm telling him I'm going to fight to the last bullet for my people, and getting more aggressive. And I tell you what, Tom, Daryl did not react. He did not. Typically, when I try to escalate a conversation like that and raise my voice and get aggressive, and this is normal for people that
Yeah.
are arguing about things, they will get angry. Daryl's expression, his mannerisms, the way he carried on the conversation was exactly the same. He did not escalate. He just goes, okay, and it just continued the conversation. So now I'm really drawn in. I'm like, why is this guy not reacting? What is going on? So I'm trying to figure him out, and really drawn into the conversation. And what Daryl did is he had shared with me what it was that happened to him in his childhood that brought him on this journey to try to help people leave these groups. And he experienced racism as a young boy. At 11 years old, he was in a Boy Scout parade, and he was being pelted with rocks by white adults. And when he went home, he had his parents said, "Why are you all banged up? What happened, Daryl?" And he says, I don't know. Some people didn't like the Boy Scouts, and they were throwing rocks at us." And Daryl's parents had to explain to him that that didn't have anything to do with the Boy Scouts. They were throwing rocks at him because he was black. And he says, "Jeff, for the first time in my life, I thought my parents are lying to me. Never before did I ever think they lied to me, but that day I was sure of it. It didn't make any sense. How
Yeah.
can someone hate me when they don't know me?" And I'm trying to place myself in his shoes, and I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about my own kids, and it had a profound effect on me.
One of the it's an interesting thing because it's not something that simply happens in a racial type setting. It happens everywhere. How can people exclude people from processes if they don't even know them? How can people just base things on a particular bias? In that case, it happened to be that he is an individual who was the son of a diplomat, if I recall correctly. They lived around the world. Um, and he comes back to this little place called America, which is home, and he gets treated not the same way as he would have elsewhere. You mentioned in that anecdote that you chose to escalate the conversation at points in time. Um, it automatically raises the question of tactics that people use to get others riled, to have an impact on them. Is that something that is common when you're dealing when people in extremist movements, if I can use that term loosely for the moment, is that you, what you and some of your colleagues would have done to deliberately bring awareness to the cause, and that is, find ways of getting people agitated?
100%. These organizations, extremist organizations, they will find hot button issues, things that are going on in society. One of the things that the NSM the group that I had to run, would pick events that were going on. Like, for example, in Kansas, in the state of Kansas, there was these brutal murders. That were labeled by the press the Carr brothers murders, and it was a couple of young black men that had raped and murdered some young white people, college kids, and it was just this horrific crime. And nobody can deny that. But what the group did was exploit things like that. So we went down to the state of Kansas and filed for a permit for the state capitol and did a rally at the state capitol. And I showed up with a noose, and I'm holding a noose up in the air, and it was all over the front pages of the papers and news. Every news station in the area covered it. And that was just one example of how the group would manipulate. The press coverage was never good. Obviously these were Nazis. They're not going to say, "Oh, the Nazis are coming to town. That's great," but they would cover it. And the group became very adept at that. They had the organization had a press release department. Someone that had used to work in media was had crafted these and would say, "Hey, we're coming to town on this date here and there," and they the group was very adept at getting media coverage and finding those hot button issues. And it's the same thing we're seeing with extremist organizations now, or a lot of things being co-opted, and radical elements of different groups are sprinkled into protests and things we're seeing now as today as well.
What are some of the other things that would be done from time to time by groups like the one you were a member of that would get attention, incite people to anger, cause anxiety, aggravate law enforcement? What are the kinds of things that people can expect when the temperature is fairly high around an issue, as it is at the moment with the Israel-Gaza conflict and the issues of anti-Semitism that are now rife at the present time in Australia and elsewhere?
So these groups will use things like shock tactics, or they'll get out there, and whenever you have two opposing sides out there at these things, a lot of times things get real heated. And you may have people on both sides that are out there peacefully protesting, that have, that they care about their cause or their belief system, and they're out there protesting. But you have other individuals that are, trying to escalate it. They might be throwing rocks or things like that, or pushing against police barriers, or intensifying things, or having really offensive materials, like in the world that I was in, swastikas on the flags and things of that nature. Or with the protests we're seeing now, the pro-Hamas elements, and arguing with the Jewish side, and things of that nature. And people will put some of the more vile stuff that we've seen is, they'll use neo-Nazi or Nazi imagery, comparing Jewish people to Nazis, and on the other side, you'll see people out there that say, well, we care about the Palestinians, but yet they're waving Hamas flags, which is considered a designated terrorist organization. At least over here it is. And I think I'm not sure about it in Australia, but maybe it is. Yeah, so I that's provocation. It could be considered provocation.
Now, having said that, there's a range of ways in which you provoke, and social media also causes that and adds to that, because people start to interact. The ability to publish has been democratized, and people are able to spend their time arguing with each other on platforms, which can be unedifying, particularly when it's issues related that are fairly vexed and fairly heated. How do we start to turn the temperature down in that sort of discourse? What we can break it. We can break this down. What can governments do better to try and, cool the environment?
It's kind of a two-pronged question, I think, in some ways, because on social media it's different in a lot of ways, because a lot of times people are hiding behind a cloak of
Anonymity.
Yes, I don't know. I couldn't say it, but they're hiding behind that cloak,
Okay.
um, so it's not like to a lot of people that's not a real conversation. They can say these hateful, hideous things that they might not say to somebody else's face. So, and you have free speech and all that, which is fine. But when you're saying illegal things, I think that's where, especially if you're advocating violence, promoting things that are illegal, that's where governments have to crack down on that and have to step in. And if we're talking about face-to-face confrontations, like if you're out there on the streets and you're at these events and you have the chance to talk with somebody one-on-one, those conversations are different. We have to see the humanity in one another, because once you start dehumanizing somebody, you lose your own humanity in that process, is the way I see it. So respectful conversations is where it's at. And even like with relational dialogue, we don't all have to agree on everything. I mean, how boring the world would be if we all agreed on everything anyways. How plain would it be? But having these conversations and finding commonalities, and it's not bad to be passionate about what you believe in, but when you take that passion and you're willing to harm somebody else in the process, or escalate to violence, that's a problem. That's a serious problem. And we're seeing that escalation across the world, unfortunately. And it quite often devolves into racism, hatred, anti-Semitism, and dehumanization of the so-called other.
Governments can do certain things, and they can put in measures like create laws that have punishments, sometimes severe, for engaging into vandalism or attacking people who are of a particular race, creed, or whatever the characteristic happens to be. In life, we can't always control how other people approach an issue, but we can control how we react. Okay?
Yep.
At an individual level, what should people be doing when they see this kind of aggression played out, whether it's on social media or whether it's elsewhere? How should individuals deal with some of this?
Work to de-escalate it. Now, if it's on social media and somebody's making, death threats, or saying things that are illegal, I would encourage them to report that. A lot of times when I'm speaking at schools and things, a lot of the kids will say, well, we just ignore those people, or we just block them. I said, well, maybe you can do that, but then the next person might be affected differently by it, and it might not be able to turn away from it. So you should always try to report those type of things. Do your own due diligence, and otherwise, if it's just nastiness and it doesn't fall into that illegal category, or you're out at a protest and someone's getting really aggressive, de-escalate. Don't just turn a blind eye to it. Try your best to de-escalate it, and a lot of times, by having conversations and turning the temperature down, basically get in there and don't let it escalate to violence, because that's not good for anybody, and it causes harm.
There is a risk, isn't there, when some people go into a situation they just escalate. So they've actually got to, or attempt to de-escalate. They've actually got to do a risk assessment of whether they're in any real danger. But when you talk to people about this stuff at schools um, and other venues, how do you address the prospect of any danger somebody might have in going into a situation and kind of trying to get somebody to pull away from the anger and the agitation that they've expressed?
Well, it kind of depends on the situation. Like I'll say to people, don't go in and put yourself in extreme danger in the first place if you can help it. But a lot of times I've seen firsthand at demonstrations and things like that where somebody will come in and, like, say if there's violence. I'm thinking of a rally in LA from years back that I was involved in. I remember seeing this um, man that was on it was I didn't see it personally, but I saw it on the news afterwards. And some guy had gotten caught in the counter protest section and was being beaten and just viciously beaten. And there was one black woman that had come in there and was pushing people off and trying to protect this man, and said, this isn't the way to do it. This is not, we don't, we can disagree, but we don't use violence. And she was very brave, and she may have saved the guy's life or from serious injury, because those things can escalate really fast. So sometimes it takes I for one, I like that courage. I think it's meaningful, but at the same time, if it's somebody that's going to get hurt in the process, you think like a 90-year-old woman trying to get in there and do something, she could get hurt, so I wouldn't necessarily encourage that either. It just depends on the risk and the situation, I guess. But that was just one example I could think of right off the top of my head.
You, in your time in the movement, you also would have been in confrontations with people periodically. How did that feel?
The organization that I was a part of, we would always say, and tell people before events or anything like that. Typically, there was a little pep talk or a speech before every event. Never hit first, because we had to maintain legality. If we went into a situation and we're fighting the far left and punch somebody in the face first, then we were going to jail. So I would always say, you can engage in self-defense, but you can't hit first. And if somebody and you can't start hitting somebody on the ground, because that makes it illegal if you're beating somebody that's down on the ground. So we knew the laws, at least of the United States, and that's how we handled it. But to answer the question directly, how did it feel? The adrenaline, it was an adrenaline surge. And a lot of times when events did break out into violence, the group used that material, because the group was always the organization was always filming things. They had NSM media out there filming stuff, and when there was riots or when there was fighting and things like that, those video clips were utilized. And there was a big fight in New Jersey at an event with Antifa, and those video clips from that fight were turned into music videos, were turned into propaganda, and the recruits and applications started rolling in for membership when that went out, because they're like, whoa, I want to fight, I want to get involved. People see that. And so this was another way the group manipulated these these violent instances, to fuel recruitment. And the group would say things like, well, all these other guys are on the internet talking about this stuff. We're out here in the streets. If you're a real man and you want to come and fight, join us. So that was a way it appealed to bring in more, street fighter types.
So one of the key things here is visibility in activism, regardless of the cause that it is then not only utilised to agitate the community at large and to get media coverage, but that then propels the other messaging activities, be it through propaganda, in order to get more recruits run.
100%. I mean, in a few of the instances when there was riots, like in Toledo and in Arizona and a couple other places, the recruitment spiked after that. So I would say this to the people that are in, like, opposing organizations and stuff too. So if you're out there and you're opposing whatever group it is, whether it's the Israel Hamas divide, whether it's far right, far left, whatever it is, if you're out there and you're going to escalate something and get the other side to get violent or whatever, keep in mind what you're doing is fueling it. You are aiding their cause in that, and that was just so common over the years that it was manipulated in that way. So if you think if you're an ideologue or you're idealist and you're out there trying to make a difference and it escalates into something like that, realize what you're doing by default is recruiting for the groups that you oppose. And nobody thinks about it that way, but that's something to think about before escalating things.
Is that something that will pose a challenge to different activist groups who, regardless of what they are, whether it's here in Australia, we've had a long-running argument over within a Conservative Party here over a politician's involvement in a pro-women movement or pro-women activity, march or protest, where a group of neo-Nazis fronted on the steps of our Parliament House. And then you had another group opposing them, and all three were effectively, marshalling for their own cause. It will be interesting to know how many people got what recruits or got people interested in their cause from their perspective, just from that event alone, let alone, on one side, as you say, it might be the far left opposing the far right. And the far left might actually be doing the far right a favor.
That's what I'm trying to say is nobody thinks about it that way, but that's the way it was. And I can give you another example. There was a rally that we had that the group had done, NSM had done in Mississippi or Alabama. It was somewhere down south, and
Okay.
and nobody showed up. There was nobody out there. We figured that police or somebody had kind of shut down the area, so there was like almost nobody there. There was some press, but there was nobody there throwing rocks or trying to fight us or anything like that. And I'm looking around at I think the Klan had come out to support us and stuff, and my own group members, and everybody was down. Everybody was like, "This sucks. This is the worst rally we've ever been to." And I'm thinking the morale is so low because there was nothing going on, like we're just out there talking to ourselves and the police that were out there, that had to be there. So nobody came out to oppose us really. And it was like morale dropped, right? So as the head of the group, I'm thinking, all these people that came out might not come to the next one, and this is stuff that people on the outside don't think about, so if you take away their morale, and I feel that's a powerful lesson, because other times when there was violence, and of course the media plays a role unknowingly maybe, but when they're covering this stuff, then it's all over the television, the groups promoting it across social media, putting it out to their mailing lists and things like that to ramp people up. And every time I can tell you that there was violence that broke out at something, we got flooded with emails, like from members that didn't show up or didn't make it, like, "Oh, I'll be there next time." And new recruits interested are like, "Well, you guys are out there fighting in the streets. I want to get involved," So these are things to think about. So yes, unwittingly, other when these groups clash, they're doing each other a favor. So it's almost like a symbiotic relationship between, and I'm just using far right and far left as an example because that's where my experience.
I mean, it's a little bit like Batman and the Joker, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
But I guess the other thing that gets me, and having studied this space and looking at it from different perspectives, and this is a question that may not have a clean answer. over the past month or so in Australia, we've had a lot of focus on increasing the penalties for people engaged in violent activity, whether it be against property or against individuals, particularly as a result of what we're observing in terms of an increase in visible anti-Semitism. I guess the question underlying all of this is anti-Semitism is an idea. It's an expression, or the set of ideas, it's an expression of antipathy towards Jewish people. And this is a difficult question to talk through, but how do we kill an idea, or at best, how do we discourage people from becoming adherents to it?
Adherence to like anti-Semitism, for example.
Correct.
A lot of times, these old hatreds, they come from lack of understanding, ignorance in a lot of ways. And in this, people say, well, I'm not ignorant, I'm well educated, but it's lack of understanding. I know for me it was that, and I was a raging anti-Semite, and now today I work with the Jewish community. A lot of my friends are Jewish. But that came from scapegoating, that came from lack of understanding, not understanding the culture. It's easy to vilify someone that, or a group of people that you don't understand, that you're unfamiliar with, because and a good example of this is like, that I use is like ISIS, and they're out there chopping off heads and things like that, and then you might talk with somebody, or somebody comes on the news program and says, well, he was such a nice young man, I don't understand how he grew up to do something like that. That's radicalization. A lot of times, I mean, you automatically think, well, so if somebody's doing that, they might be a psychopath or a sociopath. Well, true, but in a lot of cases, these are regular people that aren't that have been radicalized so bad to believe in this cause, whatever it might be. And I'm just again using examples, because this goes across the spectrum: the far right, the far left, religious extremism. The pathway to radicalization is very similar, even though the ideologies are different. The pathways there and the psychological drivers are all very, very similar. And that surprised me as well, when I started doing this work, because I felt like the far right was unique in its drivers and stuff, and it's certainly not. And I've learned that in the last 5 years or so, and I've seen it in doing this work. How the similarities are, the social structures, and so many other commonalities, even across diverse spectrums of ideology. So the approach and to de-radicalization and to turning down the temperature is the same across the boards.
What are the key ways in which you deal with, in terms of radicalization and turning down the temperature, as we put it? How does that happen?
Like on an individual one-on-one basis, a lot of that is done through conversations and finding the commonalities, and a lot of times it's seeing the humanity in the people that we're vilifying. It's like, we can disagree on things, but if you don't see the humanity in the person that you're opposing, that leads to radicalization. So a lot of times, just having conversations and reaching those commonalities and seeing the humanity in the person on the other side it's incredibly important, and it's hard to do sometimes. You're when you're entrenched in an ideology, you're often blinded to the things that are outside of that bubble or that echo chamber, and I was guilty of that myself, and it's certainly a common theme across these groups. So the approach, you don't approach it in a sense like you go to somebody and you say, you're wrong, or try to convince them that they're wrong, because that doesn't work. Then you automatically get pushback. You need to show them how they're wrong, and and demonstrate that. And a lot of times, you might not change their beliefs, but you might change the way they go about things.
If you could talk to governments at this point in time, given where we're at with various issues to do with anti-Semitism and other types of hatred, antipathy, whatever you want to call it, what would you say to leaders in a particular country, ministers of law, attorneys general, for example? What is important? Well, what should they be doing now?
First of all, the laws had to be enforced, and we're seeing in many cases where vandalism is going unchecked. Violence is taking place at some of these rallies. Enforce the law. First and foremost, the law has got to be enforced. You can't turn a blind eye to this stuff, and you can't play favorites. You can't say, "Well, this side is worse than the other side." No, it's all. If you're engaged in illegal activity, it's all bad, and you can't play favorites and say, "Well, this side is doing this, and we're letting this go, but we're going to drop the hammer on the other side." And you can't do that. It has to be fair across the boards. And if it's not, it encourages it. It will escalate it, and that's something that we've seen firsthand in quite a few situations where that hasn't been held in place. So that's one big thing in particular is handle it fairly and even-handedly.
What's next?
It's a big problem because we're seeing so much dehumanization across the boards, and if we talk about like the Israel Gaza situation where both sides are dehumanizing the other in many ways, and I'm saying that with a broad brush because they don't all do that, but I'm saying some radical elements, like seizing civilian hostages, and I've seen that at on campuses and things like that where that's being celebrated, and that's being praised, and things of that nature. So you have to draw a line somewhere. You can say, you know what, I support this cause, and have your belief system, but when you're encouraging things like that cause harm, that's where there's got to be a line drawn.
Is that an issue of legislation, or is that a form of some kind of a challenge for the education system to create an environment where you're dealing with comparative philosophy, you're comparing things as opposed to going in too hard on or neglecting, teaching people about different things, so they build an they're inoculated against the crap when they understand things better.
I mean, I think a big part of it is education because a lot of people are not getting both sides of it, or they're just being swept up in it. And we're seeing a lot of that too, where you've seen some of these people going in and interviewing students and things like that on college campuses that are on one side or another. And a lot of them are not very well informed. They're just kind of swept up into this stuff. And in some cases, you have university professors that are implanting this ideology in them and adding to that radicalization. So I would say, like, if I was running the college, I was in the administration, and there was radical professors on campus that were promoting this ideology in the classroom, I'd say that's a problem. And that anybody that's promoting any kind of radical ideology, whatever it might be, religious, political, whatever, should not be teaching, should not have access to students to implant those radical ideologies into their into young minds. That's it's so preposterous that sort of thing takes place, and there's I mean, I'm not going to name names, but I think there's been enough of it where it's easy to find and find those examples.
Jeff, you've been most generous with your time. It is getting. It is probably chilly outside, and it's sort of early evening in Detroit, Michigan. Where do people find your work, or where can people know more about what you do with um, helping people get out of the rut of radical views?
So they can reach out to us through my website, jeffscoop.com, or beyondbarriersusa.org. Um, Beyond Barriers is our organization, nonprofit organization. We help people get out of cults, gangs, any forms of extremism, and help people repurpose their lives. And also, the Simon Wiesenthal Centre is another great organization for people to reach out to as well. So.
Jeff, it's been some time since we've spoken. It's been great to touch base with you again. Unfortunately, in circumstances where we're having to speak about issues that are vexed, but thank you for making the time today.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. It's an honor to be on the program again, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. I've been speaking with Jeff Schoep, who is a former leader of the National Socialist Movement, but these days engages with a range of organisations for his own, as you know, Beyond Barriers, a not-for-profit organisation, as well as Simon Wiesenthal Centre. If you have any issues like this, talk to community groups, talk to adults you're close to. If you've got concerns about issues, reach out to people and let them know you need help. We are at a point in time now where people are being affected by what we would call destructive and bad ideas. Be aware of that. As Jeff has said, there are people who manipulate and use ideas and use ways of communicating about them to make you agitated and to get you concerned. Talk to authorities if you need to, and their numbers are in various places on the internet to do that. And thank you for watching. Stay safe and look after each other. And there'll be another episode of Ravlic at Large fairly shortly. So keep looking at the YouTube channel and subscribe. Thanks for watching again.